Does God exist? My goal in this is not to convince you of anything, but to give you some things to think about. I'm going to dive into the question, does God exist, by looking at tons of science with 3 points: logic, design, and morality. I will cite the sources from the quotes in the description below. Number 1, logic. If you saw a painting, you would recognize there had to have been a painter. Even if you couldn't see them or talk to them, the painting was proof there was a painter. If you saw a building, you would recognize there had to have been a builder. Even if you couldn't see them or talk to them, the building was proof there was a builder. That's logical, right? The same is true of creation. We see the design and complexity of creation and therefore can assume that there was a creator. Romans 1:20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." Antony Flew, in turning from atheism to believing in God, said his belief hinged on 3 aspects, and I quote, "The first is the fact that nature obeys laws. The second is the dimension of life. The third is the very existence of nature." End quote. The law of conservation states that from nothing comes nothing. Nothing indeed produces nothing. The experiments of renowned 19th century scientist Louis Pasteur showed the law of biogenesis. For example, life comes only from life and that of its kind. Perhaps the most influential paleontologist of the 20th century was George Gaylord Simpson. Simpson and his colleagues observed, and I quote, "There is no serious doubt that biogenesis is the rule, that life comes only from other life, that a cell, the unit of life, is always and exclusively the product or offspring of another cell." End quote. Even if scientists could create something from nothing, where did the scientists with their brain and comprehension come from? So could God have created life? How about some of the odds of the teleological argument? The odds of the force of gravity and the cosmological constant, 2 of over 30 areas of science that had to be exact for life to exist, is 1 part in 100 million trillion 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 for it to happen. I said trillion 7 times. Do you realize the magnitude of that number? If you counted 1 number per second, it would take 542,241 years to count to 1 trillion. The number again for 2 of over 30 areas of science to be exact for life to exist was 100 million trillion 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 trillion. Would you be willing to bet your life savings on life happening by chance outside of that odd? If you stacked $100 bills up to the sky to reach $1 trillion, it would reach 67.9 miles. Oxford physicist Roger Penrose, a peer of the renowned late atheist Stephen Hawking, calculated that the chance of a universe capable of supporting life as we know it is 1 part in 10 raised to the power of 10 raised to the power of 123. This number is so large that if you were to write out each zero as the size of a proton, it could not fit within the known universe. He writes, "Such figures are beyond human comprehension. We cannot help but wonder how these constants could have happened to have these values. Just a slight change in even a few of these numbers, and atoms could not form, stars could not shine, the earth and all its inhabitants could not even exist." End quote. Sir Fred Hoyle stated, "At all events, anyone with even a nodding acquaintance with the Rubik cube will concede the near impossibility of a solution being obtained by a blind person moving cubic faces at random. Now imagine 10 to the 50th power blind persons, each with a scrambled Rubik cube, and try to conceive of the chance of them all simultaneously arriving at the solved form. You then have the chance of arriving by random shuffling at just one of the many biopolymers on which life depends." End quote. Sproul, Gerstner, and Lendsley observed, "The fact is, however, we have a no chance creation. we must erase the 1 which appears above the line of the 1, followed by a large number of zeros. What are the real chances of a universe created by chance? Not a chance. Chance is incapable of creating a single molecule, let alone an entire universe." End quote. Writing in New Scientific, renowned atheist Richard Dawkins admitted, and I quote, "The more statistically improbable a thing is, the less we can believe that it just happened by blind chance. Superficially, the obvious alternative to chance is an intelligent designer." End quote. Number 2, design. Could a book write itself? What are the chances of a book writing itself? Think about those questions for a moment. If a book is unable to write itself, then logically it had an author to write the book. Can you tell me what DNA is? DNA is the instruction book of life. DNA is in every form of life, humans, animals, trees, plants, and flowers. It stores unique information, and one cell alone contains 8 billion letters, 500 million words, or 8,000 books. Our DNA can stretch from here to the sun and back 100 times. Each DNA strand is 9 feet in length. Bill Gates had this to say about DNA. "DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software we've ever created." End quote. The 20th century most influential atheist, Antony Flew, who later came to believe in the existence of God, said, and I quote, "What I think the DNA material has done is that it has shown by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life, that intelligence must have been involved." End quote. John Sanford, PhD in genetics, said this, "There is no information system designed by man that can even begin to compare to DNA." Again, I ask the question, could a book write itself? How could the book of life, DNA, come into existence without an author? Let's move on to what others have said and other designs. Dr. Werner Gitt, PhD in physics, said, "Without a doubt, the most complex information processing system in existence is the human body." End quote. Let's get more specific and move on to the cell. The cell is the smallest unit of matter alive and is more complex than any machine man has ever made. Many websites have varying numbers of how many cells our bodies carry. One estimate is 37.2 trillion cells. Our bodies make millions of new cells every second, and they all work together. That alone is a miracle. One living cell in the human body is more complicated than all of New York City, says Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling. One cell's information has the storage capacity of a stack of books 500 times as tall as the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Could the cell, which is the smallest unit of matter and more complex than any machine ever made, have been able to create itself? If so, how? How about the complexity of water, such as water in clouds? How does evaporation take the ocean water but leave the salt to form clouds? It is a system of purification and supply that sustains life on this planet. Another fascinating feature is that scientists estimate that 1 inch of rain falling over an area of 1 square mile is equal to 17.4 million gallons of water. That much water would weigh 143 million pounds. Pretty amazing, since a plane can fly right through a cloud. Snowflakes are in another amazing design of complexity, as each snowflake is unique from all the others. The leading scientist on snowflakes, Caltech professor of physics Kenneth Lilbrecht, still can't yet fully explain the underlying molecular mechanisms that produce the amazing symmetry. One more amazing feature about water, water also freezes from the top down, which is the opposite of what you would think. This allows lakes and oceans to not freeze from the bottom up, which would kill all marine life. Place ice cubes in a glass of water and they float. Shouldn't the ice cube, a solid, weigh more and sink to the bottom? Did you know that as plants breathe in carbon dioxide, they breathe out oxygen? We do the opposite. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. We need plants for our survival. How does this all happen? Could God, a supernatural being outside of our understanding, have created this? How about the design of animals? How about the gecko lizard? The gecko lizard can walk across the ceiling upside down without falling off. On its toe pads are an estimated 500 million tiny fibers tipped with little suction cups. Dr. Robert Kofal explains, the extraordinary microscopic structure of the gecko lizard's toe pads clearly indicates intelligent, purposeful design. End quote. Have you heard of the common swift bird? The common swift bird is capable of flying for 10 months without once touching land, a world record for time on the wing. Hedenstrom, a biologist at Lund University in Sweden, said, "It's the most extreme example that we know of." End quote. Common swifts make a 10-month journey from Northern Europe to Central Africa and back each year, spending 99.5% of their migration in the air. 3 of the birds never landed at all, traveling more than 10,000 miles without rest. When I think of a bird knowing how to navigate 10,000 miles in the air without asking for directions, that sounds like the design of a GPS navigational system to me. So if you're thinking maybe there could be a God, can you imagine if he said this? "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain, and a path for the thunderstorm, to water a land where no man lives, a desert with no one in it? Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? Lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you, "Here we are"? Who endowed the heart with wisdom, or gave understanding to the mind? Do you give the horse his strength, or clothe his neck with a flowing mane? Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread his wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build his nest on high? Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. This was taken from one of the oldest books of the Old Testament in the Bible, and can be attributed to God talking to a man named Job in chapters 38 through 40 of Job. Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered the law of gravity, said, and I quote, "In the absence of any other proof, the thumb alone would convince me of God's existence." How about plants and trees? In a pine tree, the bark is segmented into large plate-like structures whose appearance has been likened to a jigsaw puzzle. This unusual design has a purpose. If the tree catches fire, these plates pop off as the bark burns. The tree, in effect, sheds its burning bark. Since design demands a designer, do you think the pine tree was designed? Did you know that plants can do math? A recent study by Alison Smith and Martin Howard of the John Innes Center in Norwich suggests that plants perform basic arithmetic in order to preserve the correct amount of starch during the night. The study was by Ledford in 2013. Experimental results have shown that plants can vary their rate of starch consumption based on the number of hours of darkness they experience. Consider some of the amazing aspects of design that are evident in our solar system. The Earth is positioned at just the right distance from the Sun so that we receive exactly the proper amount of heat to support life. The other planets of our solar system are either too close to the Sun or else too far to sustain life. If the Earth were to rotate at 1/10 its present rate, all plant life would either be burned to a crisp during the day or be frozen at night. The Moon revolves around the Earth at a distance of about 240,000 miles, causing harmless tides on the Earth. If the moon were located 1/5 of this distance away, the continents would be completely submerged twice a day. The Earth's axis is tilted 23 degrees from the perpendicular to the plane of its orbit. This tilting, combined with the Earth's revolution around the sun, causes our seasons, which are absolutely essential for the raising of food supplies. The Earth's atmosphere serves to protect the Earth by burning up approximately 20 million meteors each day that enter in at speeds of about 30 miles per second. Without this crucial protection, the danger to life would be immense. The late German physicist Werner Heisenberg had said, and I quote, "The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you," end quote. Antony Flew, who for 5 decades was the world's leading atheistic thinker, was forced in the end to conclude, and I quote, "The only satisfactory explanation for the origin of such indirected, self-replicating life as we see on Earth is an infinitely intelligent mind," end quote. Paul Davies is an acclaimed physicist and writer at Arizona State University. He said, "The cliche that life is balanced on a knife's edge is a staggering understatement in this case. No knife in the universe could have an edge that fine," end quote. Let's take a look at the law of cause and effect. Since the universe exists, it had to have had a cause. It cannot explain its own existence. The law of cause and effect states that every material effect must have had an adequate cause. You can't explain the effect of something until you recognize the cause of it. My question then is, what caused the universe to exist? The universe is the created, not the creator. Would you agree? An uncaused creation can't create itself out of nothing. Be sure to start with the cause of something before you get to the effect of something. The 13th century philosopher and theologian St. Thomas Aquinas, in his book Summa Theologica, had shown 5 arguments for the existence of God as the unmoved mover, the first cause, the necessary being, the absolute being, and the grand designer. If God was not the first cause, then what is the purpose of life? The most complex computer ever made can perform 1,000 million computations per second. This supercomputer can understand written and mathematical codes, use logic and reasoning, can design, plan, reflect, question, and even create music. This supercomputer is the human brain. The Bible says in Psalm 139:14a, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." So far we have seen that life points to a creator, and the odds of this happening without God are so improbable that it would take more faith to believe that this happened by chance than to believe in God. Even if scientists were able to show that nothing can produce something, you still have to keep in mind that the scientist who is there is observing something and he was created. And as you have seen, that alone is a miracle. Dennis Prager said, and I quote, "There are very strong arguments for a designer of the world, but there are no arguments for an ultimate purpose to life if there is no God," end quote. Job 38:36 says, "Who endowed the heart with wisdom or gave understanding to the mind," end quote. The last one we'll look at is morality. Do you think believing in God is a heart issue or a head issue? If an expert on heat told me to not touch a stove because it was hot, what would they need to do to convince me? Show me the result of it being hot? What if I put my hand on the hot stove? Think I would be convinced? I would then have an experience and testimony to this. Regardless of what other heat experts would tell me about the hot stove not getting hot, I would then know from experience what the truth was. The same is true regarding God. When I did prison ministry in San Diego, I can specifically remember praying in a circle and holding hands with 2 of the inmates. One was a black man who had a Black Panther tattoo. The other was a white man who had a white supremacy tattoo. They were praying for each other. In seeing this, I witnessed what only God could do, as they not only had an experience, but a relationship with their Creator. It then becomes a heart issue of knowing God experientially, and it moves past your intellect and your feelings. If we didn't have a designer, how does one explain our conscience? Right from wrong, how do you explain morality? Francis S. Collins, MD and PhD, was a world-famous geneticist and a staunch atheist. He described himself as an obnoxious atheist. He headed up the Human Genome Project in the 1990s and had this to say about his conversion to Christianity, and I quote, "No law of science could adequately explain the existence of morality." For someone to say there are no moral absolutes, the question I have is that a true statement? Dr. Frank Turek, in a sermon at Saddleback Church, said, and I quote, "In order to know what is not right, it's imperative to know what is right. In order for there to be evil, there had to be good. There would be no such thing as evil if there was no such thing as good. And there would be no such thing as good unless God existed." End quote. We as people can play instruments, express creativity, can enjoy laughter, and yet cry at something touching our inner spirit. To be able to write poetry and songs and recite them from memory points to a purpose to our minds. We can enjoy sunsets, travel, build cathedrals, cars and bridges, and yet contemplate life and purpose. How do you explain such complexities of man without a purpose from a designer? Richard Dawkins admitted, if you look at the details of our chemistry, molecular biology, you might find a signature of some kind of designer, and that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. End quote. How can there be fine-tuning to our universe if no one exists to tune it? How can the universe be designed if no one was there to design it? How could the human body have the complexity it has, yet be without a maker who created it for purpose? The creation in life demands the existence of a creator. If you only believe something if you see it, then how do you explain gravity and the wind? Psalm 19 verses 1 through 3 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard." So what created everything? What was the initial cause? All of this and more is why I personally believe in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1. Thanks for joining me, and don't forget to subscribe.